right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. The State of the Nation continues now. We promised you that we'd split it into two. There was the political side of it. Now we're talking about data, and we have the honor of hosting Immaculate Kassait, who's the data commissioner. Thank you so much for making time for us. And you know, the most obvious question that Kenyans always wonder about is, what rights do data subjects, just the common mwananchi, the common hustler, what kind of rights do they have? Because we've seen a situation where when they borrow especially, if I have borrowed some money somewhere and I fail to pay, the people I've borrowed from send messages to everyone in my family, including my grandmother. Is that right? Is it fair? And what remedy is there?
Okay. Thank you, Trevi. I think it's a good thing that we are starting from that note about the rights of a data subject. But just to rephrase a bit, why is this important? When we talk about your rights as a data subject, we draw it from the Constitution, right to privacy. And I like to give an example. If you're in your house, there are certain things you want to stay in the house. You don't want outside. And that's why we have curtains in our homes. You don't want your neighbors peeping in and seeing what you have inside. It's the same thing about your right to privacy, your information, your name, your children, your family, your financial matters, all those, your health status, your conscience. It's a fundamental right that you have. But nonetheless, having said that, you can't live in your house and protect all your rights. You then must step out to the public sphere. So what rights are those as a data subject? One is accuracy of information. You have a right to that. You have a right to objection to processing. You can say, you've processed my information and I'll connect that to the issue about predator lending. But you can say, I only allow you to access this amount of information. You have a right to even deletion. They shouldn't keep your information longer than expected. You have right access to information that you can say, I want to know what information you have. You can go to a credit and say, what information do you have about me? Those are the rights. And if a data subject, for instance, in the cases we see about digital lending, complaints of people accessing the information, it means at the point of the terms and condition, you clicked on access. But that clicking on access, you can still object to it. You can come back and say, please, can you rectify? I do not want you to access information on who my contacts, my contact list, because you have a contract with the person lending you money, but they do not have a contract with a third party. So you can actually object to your information being processed beyond that. And it's important that Kenyans know that those rights are available. But many times, as Kenyans, we do not read the terms and conditions. And you can't blame them. At times it's because of desperation, and they want to access the credit, and it's a need basis. So they quickly click on it and they don't. But it's important to read the terms and conditions. And you see the CBK laws were reviewed. And the reason why is to also put to check some of these digital lenders to make sure they are in line. And beyond that, and to commend CBK, because they've gone beyond that and reached out to Google, where most people are using the app, so that they're saying, can we hold these people accountable? For us as an office, we are here if you're harassed, and we've had many of those complaints. Some of them, of course, but you had a contractual obligation, so that's why we went out and said we are auditing 40 farms. And that is an ongoing process, because 40, you have to find out what exactly is the issue. And it comes from a point of, we are a country that has been sharing information. Some of these people may not even know they are violating. So, but those who are not, we've issued almost one enforcement notice to a digital lender to shape up. Yes. And
take us through the landscape, the landscape of the data protection right now. What is the situation we have? Because you've mentioned something interesting, that sometimes out of desperation, you just click accept without even reading what's going on there. But what kind of protection landscape is there currently that you say you'd be proud of?
The law, I mean, the reason the data protection law was enacted, and of course, learning from the European regime, from the African regime, is to really protect your rights as a data subject. So that law exists, and the options you have is to complain to the Office of the Data Commission, and we can then intervene in terms of investigating the matter, conducting an inspection on the matter. We can inspect, we can audit farms, we can also fine. We have the power to actually undertake an administrative fine, which is 1% of your previous year profit, or up to a maximum of 5 million. We hope it was higher, like is in Europe. Yeah. Anyway, that's what it is. And we've had complaints. We've had complaints over 1,700. The ones we admitted were 700. Of that, you see the highest percentage is around that area of digital lenders. So
over 1,700 complaints?
Yes. And that is just the beginning. And we've not even, the office has been there for 2 years. We anticipate even higher complaint, and not just on that area. We anticipate unsolicited messages which are commercial in nature. We anticipate. You can see from the practice across the globe, the issue of data protection is really live, because data for commercial use is one of the biggest money making across the globe. Yes.
So how much data should someone give actually?
Minimum. Always ask yourself, what do I, and I like to give, let's give practical example. You go to a kiosk, you're buying, you're buying your basics grocery. Why does your shopkeeper need to know or which routes you use to go home, or where you live, or what your children's name are? Do they need to know those details? All they need to know, for instance, is if you're sending the money through a mobile wallet. Yeah. That's it. So when you go into a supermarket now, and we like loyalty because loyalty cards give you a bit of leverage and discount end of the month, and they give you gifts. Ask yourself, beyond the basic information about where you are, why do they need to know your address? Why do they need to know your address? Because the more you give, they can almost, you leave a finger, you leave what we call footprints online. And they can almost dictate what it is. Look at, if you have an app on a grocery shop or a supermarket, you can see they tell you discounts. Yeah. They almost tell you last week you bought this here, this week you have not bought this. They are basically influencing your thoughts. Yeah. And when you influence your thought, what does that mean for you as a person? And it's all apps, by the way, because through you're clicking on apps and you're saying you allow tracking. Yeah. So what they are doing, they basically use your information to analyze and help influence you to make certain decisions. Yeah. So in the end, your privacy is gone out of the window. So give minimum information, and that's one of the obligation of the data controllers, to only collect information that is minimal. Yeah. They don't need to collect information that is excess.
But this data minimization, is it the circumstance under which we live that then now exposes people to a lot more? You just inadvertently end up giving information. Like you said, if you're going to shop for groceries, if you're going to use an Uber, people already know where you're heading. So somehow there's a pattern. Yes. If you pay using M-Pesa, those people already know where you, what your number is, what your name is, what your number is, where you're heading. So how can you minimize it? And yet you have to do the normal day-to-day living.
I think it's that's why we are here, and I'm glad we have this opportunity to speak about it as part of awareness, because it's a shift in terms of culture. It's very common in our African culture to share information. We are very oral. We like to tell stories. Yeah. And as part of our stories telling, we don't hold back. And now we are here to tell you in terms of data protection. As you tell your stories and tell us where you are, where your children are, and you share everything. I'm sure even if I Googled, if I checked online, I'll find where you are. In the long run, it has an effect on you, because it could lead to discrimination. When you share excess information to people, I remember some time back, for insurance, simple things like insurance, taking insurance for your car, would ask about they would ask you to go for a test, medical test. Yeah. What is the connection between insuring my car and medical? Why do you need to know my medical status? Imagine if that information which they have harvested from you ended in the wrong hands. What will that mean for you? It means you could be discriminated against. People will make a decision about what premium they will give you based on your risk factor. And in this case is your health. If that information ended up online on a wrong person, you're trolled. Yeah. Everybody in this town knows what your health status is. Is that what you want to share with the public? No, so data minimization is reduce reduce how much you share, because it also reduces your risk of exposure.
Yeah.
Yes, that is what data minimization is about.
But there's also the aspect of family, and it's important that you're talking about data minimization. We've seen situations where now an entire family is a group of influencers, including a young child. And that's what they do for a living. So ideally, they're supposed to share all possible information as much as possible out there. Yeah, where now do you draw the line with that?
I think it's a tricky one, I'd have to say, because then what are you telling these people in terms of their income?
Yes.
But it's important as you make those decisions as a family, know the risks that are associated, because then you're able to limit them. And it's the same thing. I'll introduce a concept we call data protection impact assessment. Even though we recommend that for data controllers and data processors, I would suggest as a family you do one of your own. Do a risk-benefit analysis, what this will mean in the long run. Because you know the internet never forgets also. 20 years down the lane, they will be looking for you. And I think we have a responsibility as parents, even as we use our children as influencers, to actually realize the kind of risk we are subjecting them to in the future. So it's important we are aware. If you make up that decision, because it's really a personal decision, at least you're aware of the risk that you've taken.
Yeah. Let's get a bit technical here. So what is the difference between data controllers and processors?
We go back to the example of a hospital.
Yeah.
The hospital which you go to collect your personal information. Think about it. When you are going to a hospital, they give you that form to give your detail. What is your name? Do you have history in terms of this medical condition? What is your address? What is your post office for communication purposes? Because they collect that information and they are using it for purposes of perhaps diagnosis, we call them data controller. Okay. They collect the information and determine what to do with it. The processor, on the other hand, the hospital could outsource a certain service. For instance, they may not be the ones who own the machines in that hospital. They could be supplied by a third party. But that machine has to then go through your diagnosis and make a determination what you're suffering. So that becomes a data processor. The hospital gives instruction to a third party to make determination for you, to analyze information on their behalf. We recommend every time there's a relationship between a data controller and processor, there needs to be a contract.
Yeah.
A contract, one of non-disclosure, one of making sure they're also safeguarding data protection.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is also another interesting perspective, because government and corporates handle so much data. What measures should they put in place to secure Kenya's data locally and internationally? Yeah.
And it's good.
Start with local first.
It's good you've asked that question about what measures. I think the starting point is an audit. Data controllers and data processors need to do a basic audit of what information they hold, where they store it, how they process it, and how they dispose it. That's the first starting point. Because it's only after knowing where your data is that you're able then to put in place the necessary safeguard. Two, they need to embrace what we call data protection by default or by design. At the point where you introduce a new product, even here as a media house, assuming you're beginning to start an app, what are you supposed to actually do an analysis of the app? And then as you conceptualize it, as you plan, as you execute, you make sure that data protection runs across so that you're not thinking about it at the end. There's what we call data protection impact assessment. They need to make sure they have that. So that is a tool that helps you analyze what your risks are, especially if you're dealing with high risks. And high risk are if you're sharing data between different platforms, if you're collecting data for children, 3, if you're collecting data for special groups, 4, if you're collecting biometrics, high-risk data. It's important to make sure you could do data protection impact assessment. 4 is, of course, you recommend to have a data protection officer. Your data protection officer becomes like your champion in as far as data protection is concerned. The world of data is today, it's here, it's now. We process massive data. It's our responsibility as data controllers and data processors to make sure we put in place measures that safeguard. The flip side of not doing that is that one, you expose your clients. 2, you could lose business. Because imagine what that means when the whole world is looking at an institution and they are saying our data is not safe, it's not secure. You're likely to lose. And then 3 is reputation. But most significantly, if you're doing business, your central part should be your client, and in this case, data subject. Their rights should be at the center of doing their business, and therefore business centricity, customer centricity in your business processes.
And internationally?
Internationally, of course, because we today have cloud computing, people store a lot of information out of the country. It's important that, one, you make sure the country where you're sharing information actually what we call whitelisted, or they actually have data protection mechanism in place. Because we are a global village, movement of data from one continent to the other, one country to the other, it's expected. And also make sure, in some cases, data we have a copy here, but make sure that there are safeguards in whatever way. As far as, and we are available as an office to give advisories if you are unclear in terms of these processes.
Yeah. And do you think the numerous numbers that we have are necessary? You have an ID number, you have a KRA PIN, you have an NSSF PIN. Is it necessary to have all of them, or should we just consolidate into one? Or is this in itself a measure of protection? Because if somebody breaches and finds your ID number, it doesn't necessarily mean they have your passport number.
I think that's a conversation in terms of identity, digital identity, and many business will tell you that that actually prospers in terms of making sure the e-commerce thrives, because they're able to identify you across. There are disadvantages and advantages that have been analyzed in terms of having multiple registration regime. I think that's one of the issues that His Excellency has spoken about in terms of one identity. It's something that at a Ministry of ICT that our CS, I believe, will be championing in as far as this is concerned. Because digital identity actually then has an impact in terms of e-commerce. As an office, our role is to make sure there are safeguards. And that is one thing we can assure Kenyans, that our work, if we are not auditing, we will make sure that we are doing inspection, and we are giving an assurance to the common mwananchi that the information, whoever is holding it, as a government institution or private sector, it's safe. That's why we are here. And we have proved over time that we have capacity to bite. Yes.
As the data commissioner, now that we're talking about biting, first of all, what is the threshold for a Kenyan? Say I feel that my data has either been misused or there's some breach of privacy of some sorts. What do I need to put in place, and where do I start? Do I just walk into your office? Who do I look for, and what do I need as evidence to come and tell you I feel that there's been a breach here?
The starting point is the organization you feel has breached. That's the starting point. You need to bring it to their attention. For instance, if they have information that is not accurate about yourself, it's important to ask them, please, can you correct this information? If they do not, and you have told them, then come to us. And we don't even come to need to, we receive both physical, we encourage people to go log on to our website. Our website is available in terms of launching complaints in our office, so you don't need to be there physically. So that way, we are able to address it as a second tier when they have not addressed it. We are here to address complaints in as far, and there's no small breach. As long as your personal information has been used in a manner that you did not agree to it. And it's important, as I make that point, to also say that there are certain processes, there are certain principles available on data protection, but also organizations are allowed to process your information under the following circumstances: legal obligation. There could be any government institution may have a legal obligation under the law to process your information. It could be a contractual obligation. You and your bank, you and insurance company, or in the grocery shop, they have certain obligations because you have a contract between them. Legitimate interest, you could be a customer in a certain institution. They have a legitimate interest. 4 is a consent. When it comes to commercial interest, then there's cases you're given a consent. You need to give your consent if they're using your information for commercial, like in marketing, for instance. And then vital interest, if your life was in danger, then other people would make decision to save your life. And of course, legal basis. And that mostly apply to government institutions. They might have a legal basis, because many times people think consent is the only one. It's the weakest of all. Consent cannot be the only reason why that your data is processed. There are many other reasons. But if you feel it is being processed outside what you agreed, for instance, a contractual obligation. And we've seen complaints from banks that my information was shared with a third party. We've seen complaints, I mean, not from banks, from data subject. We've seen from NMOs that my information was not shared in an hour. We've seen from what you're saying, digital lenders. We've seen from many sectors. It cuts across. And for us is to give assurance to the public. We are here to make sure your data is protected.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I had a conversation with someone at some point, legitimate and commercial interests.
Yes.
Is it okay if I bought something, a shoe maybe, from your shop, used my M-Pesa line and sent the money, then now all of a sudden when you have a promotion, you can now send to my phone? Is that allowed?
You could say it's a legitimate interest, but the people, your shoe dealer should have an opt-out.
Okay.
That I do not want to receive these messages. And if they continue, that's why we are here. It's called opt-out,
okay.
That I can opt out from your SMSs. But as a shoe dealer, can you make sure you have a privacy notice and tell your customers, we are going to send you messages for this. Let them consent to that.
Okay.
Yes.
So there has to be a clear
Then it has to be for commercial.
Stopping it.
Yeah. I know that's one of the things we also need to tighten under the law in terms of regulations with under the Office of CS to make sure that is also addressed.
Yeah.
But for commercial purposes, that you must get consent.
Okay.
Yes.
What kind of cases have you handled so far?
I mean, like I said,
one of them that stood out for you. There must be always that one case that you, even if you don't mention all the names, because you remember that this is most likely something that happens a lot. Was it data that was stolen, then a complete impersonation, or what is the one that you remember the most?
There are many. Let me say that.
Okay.
There are many.
What are the most common?
The most common, actually, until we've seen that decline in terms of digital lenders. That was the most common.
Okay.
The other most common in the last was actually the election, political parties accessing people, sending them unsolicited messages. Those were really, really the most common. But we've seen whatever. I think people are realizing this is real. You can no longer use people's information for the sake of it. But as an office, the other things we do, when you see there's another very common one, which is there's a complaint about accessing buildings and people asking for information. Yeah, and that particular one, please remember, those people don't ask for information because it's outside the law. They actually have a lawful basis to collect your information. The question is, why are they asking for extra?
Yeah.
For instance, why are they asking for your photograph or your biometrics to access a building? That is outside. That is not data minimization. It's actually, and you can object to processing of your information, and as far as that.
So the bare minimum for that.
The bare minimum.
Name, number,
name. What is on your ID?
ID?
That's it. That is bare minimum.
Even your phone number is not necessary.
No, what we are going to do, because you see that has been the practice, is to actually give you a guidance note on what is required, what is not.
Okay.
Because also they have to comply with the law. You also don't want to. Yeah, and just to re-emphasize, this office is not here to kill innovation, because that's something we hear a lot.
Yeah.
This data commissioner is here to make sure we can't collect, because you see, if you're not analyzing information of your customers, how will you know their trend? Anyone running a restaurant here wants to know their trend.
Yeah.
Anyone running an app on the transportation wants to know their trend. They want to send you Christmas wishes.
Yeah.
No. We're just saying, when you do business, put to the center the centrality of the customer.
Yeah.
So that you protect them, because nobody wants to feel exposed. We were laughing another day when somebody said, a taxi app, without going into detail. After 2 weeks, one of the people called them and said, I gave you how? Our relationship contractually was to move me from point A to point B. You don't need to call me after that. That's supposed to be the end.
Okay.
Yes.
But now, what is the remedy for such things? Because yes,
like I said, the issue is to actually complain first to them.
Yeah.
So that they rectify. And if they are not rectifying, you come to us. And we as an issue, when those issues are brought to our issue, is us to investigate as an institution. And that is something that has brought to our attention. We'll be looking into it.
So is that at institutional level or at individual level?
It's
because
both.
If say, a taxi app that you're talking about,
Yes.
they already have your number, but then it's this particular driver who called you after work.
Yes.
And was not meant to call you. So is this complaint to the institution or to the individual?
To the app.
Yeah.
To the app, to the provision of the services, because they're the ones who, you had no relationship with the driver.
Okay.
Your relationship was with the app.
Okay.
where did you book your movement? So you used an app. You click on the app, you say, I'm available here, isn't it? So where does a third party come? It means this people is accessing information which they shouldn't. Should be to the app. If it's not rectified, the remedy is to come to us and us to investigate that matter. Okay.
And once you get to the conclusion of it, where does the settlement go? Because many people are wondering.
I like that. I like that. I like that. The Act provides for the framework. Of course, as we find, but also the complainant can request for a remedy as one of the issues.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
So this is based on a conversation?
Yes, yes, yes. It's based on what is on the table.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
As a data commissioner, is the issue around apps such a big concern? Because there are quite a number of people who nowadays say that they feel like their phones listen to them. For example, if you talk about something right now and we maybe even click it once, the next series of adverts that you will see is aligned with what you're talking about. So is it because we are downloading apps that we don't know what the terms and conditions are, or is it some level of spying?
Most likely, if you go to your phone and you downloaded an app, they will ask you and your mic is on. So if your mic is on, obviously, it's listening into what you're saying.
So someone is always listening.
It is your app. You told them you can synchronize your information on your app. So as they're synchronizing the information, they're listening. Remember what I said. We moved from our home and we shut all the windows. But when we go online, we forget. We completely lower our guard.
Yeah.
We completely lower our guard. And when we lower our guard, we click on okay. Okay. Terms and condition, never read. What tracking means, never read. So what does that mean? I'll know where you go. I can almost tell you, Trevor, what are your routes? And I can almost tell you where you will stop at any given time and who you relate with. That is the power of the information. Who is using this information? The people you develop using that business model. They go behind the scene, they analyze it, and they can tell you what suit do you like, what shoes do you like. So when somebody comes online and wants you to buy a new one, they sell you this one is available here and this one. Then everybody there is making money out of it, but you are exposed. So we are here to tell you data protection. Think about what are the things you want to limit in terms of sharing.
Okay.
Yes.
This is a very interesting conversation, but we're running out of time here, so I'll allow you to give us closing remarks in terms of what is the one thing you'd want, one or two or three, that you'd want the Kenyan listening to you today to first do and to understand.
Yes. Three things, and thank you for having me here. One, it's important for you to appreciate your rights under the data protection and to appreciate, that's why we are here as an office, to protect you and make sure your data is safeguarded by both public and private institutions. Two, it's a call to the people in business and controllers and processors, public and private. Please pay a bit of time understanding what the data protection is about, because it's a global practice. I keep saying you might look at yourself as a small business in Kenya, but remember that outside even Kenya, if you are dealing with information for somebody based in Europe, the penalty are even stiffer. It's in our interest as we move in this digital transformation to make sure that we are giving the reassurance to investors that here in Kenya, we take data protection seriously and we protect data protection. Ours is advisory, ours is also investigation, ours is also enforcement. We are here to work with you and we have an open door policy. Approach us anytime you have anything that you're not clear about. We are open to work with our stakeholders and to facilitate whatever way we can. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Madam Immaculate Kassait, the data commissioner, she says, take care of your data. Just give bare minimum information. All right. Thank you so much for staying with Citizen TV. Now we're taking a quick break. When we come back, it's time for Cooking Tips with Chef Njoro and Willis Raburu Bazu. They're on the other side, right? Bye for now. Thank you.